Second Bard. When the old man said noble, he wasn't talking about their station. This was a term of derision cast on all their ilk, including humans who'd been turned into bloodsuckers. What the old man was telling them was that the noble who attacked the desolate little fishing village under cover of fog that first time was a former villager. That place has been called Undead Island since long before the village was built. But we didn't really feel it in our hearts until that second down on the beach, when the fog cleared in flames from our torches, showed us the face of one of our own. See, that first fog had come exactly a day after we lost regular communication with the settlers. Had the nobility risen again? The fourth bounty hunter inquired, his lips seeming to curl in amusement. White teeth gleamed in his suntanned face. A repeating rifle was slung over his shoulder. That's all we could think of. The day after that first fog, the village banned all passage over to the island. Just the same, a number of folks with blood ties to the settlers broke the ban and sailed out, but not one of them ever came back. Only those unfamiliar with the frontier and the nobility would be foolish enough to label that travel ban cruel. Even now, with the nobility in extreme decline, the fear of them remained a deep black stain on the brains of the populace. But why did the nobility come back all of a sudden? Garragon's query might have been directed at himself, yet the rest of them unconsciously focused their gaze on the old man once more. No way to know that without crossing over to the island, the former mayor said, his reply carrying a terrible resignation and weariness. Even these rough men who left mountains of corpses and spilled rivers of blood were momentarily left speechless. After that brutal silence, the sheriff finally said, "That's why we're here. Could we trouble you to set us up with a boat?" The old man shook his head from side to side. "Boats are a fisherman's life. I can't let somebody else just take one out. Not even if the owner is gone now." The lawman was at a loss. "Supposing you were to take one out," the old man continued, "the area around Undead Island is still notorious for all the accidents. We get these 3 different currents colliding. I've been putting out to sea since I was all of 3, and my father and his father both warned me about getting anywhere near there. Truth is, I nearly died out there twice. No way on earth you can do it without somebody from the village along. We were hoping you could help us out there. Yesterday, as soon as Meg here notified me and we had confirmation of the situation in the village, I immediately got in touch with anyone in the nearby towns or villages who hails from this village. No one but you would even hear me out. Now, I realize coming out here wasn't easy for you. Chalk it up to shit luck if you must, but give us a little help here. You're talking to a man who turned his back on this village. After 40 years serving as mayor, all of a sudden I couldn't take any of it anymore. Not living in poverty, not the raging sea, not a miserable little village that only survived by the grace of the Lord. Sheriff, you think anybody'd be happy with a man who ran off and abandoned his own family and dragging his sorry ass back here and letting other folks use their boats? For starters, I won't allow myself to do it." Though the old man's tone was one of complete exhaustion, it was underpinned with a will of iron. "Damn, but this is the strangest thing," Garragon said, twisting his body around so he could look back at the village behind them. More than 100 villagers, from little babies up to grannies and grandpuppies, all disappearing in a single night. Everyone had already turned in the same direction. Before them, houses of wood and plastic sat in unsettling stillness in the midday sun. 2 days earlier, fog had crossed the sea in the afternoon, and apparently someone within it had taken everyone away. When the sheriff and others raced there the next morning, they found not a single soul. A village so dead, in fact, there was no sign of so much as a cat or a dog. "Meg," the sheriff called out, and the girl turned to face him. "I know we've been over this time and again, but is that really what you saw? Every last person from the village walking out to sea on top of the water, headed out to Undead Island." The lawman had a stern look in his eye that told her he wouldn't hear any lies. And the girl nodded to him, but just then a dazed look surfaced on her face. Ever since witnessing the coming of the fog, she'd done her level best not to let fear get the better of her. But the threads of willpower steadying her had suddenly been snipped, throwing them into disarray. The change was so great the sheriff himself twisted around for a look to the left, staring off at the cliffs towering over the other end of the bay, some 50 yards away. What Meg saw should have been there, but there was no one, and none of the others seemed to have seen it. However, when Meg took another look, all she could think was that some sort of incredible being had been there, something that could raise her fear-fraught psyche in rapture. "I saw," Meg said, nodding absent-mindedly. The reply seemed to come from a husk, robbed not only of its mind, but of its very soul. "I saw a really gorgeous man." Meg had left the town of Pearson about noon, and run into the sheriff's office, all pale-faced that same evening. A one-way trip between Meg's village and the town of Pearson would take a girl like her an hour and a half on foot. Apparently the girl had run the whole way, and according to her wheezing, breathless tale, tearing down the stone steps from the cliff toward the fog-shrouded village, Meg headed toward her house without the slightest hesitation. The village was already choked with thick white fog, but Meg managed to discern the shadowy forms of houses a few yards ahead of her. Relying 70% on her eyesight, and the other 30 on instinct, she headed for the center of the village. A grocery store called Gaz's Place, that was 50 or 60 feet from the bay. But when the girl got there, the door was open. "Huh," she said, the word escaping her in surprise. The ironclad rule was that when fog came in from the sea, you shut your doors and didn't open them, even if you were your own family. And you didn't open them, even if it were your own family outside. Standing in front of the shop was the proprietor, Gaz Kemp. And it wasn't just him. His wife, son, both daughters, and even his bedridden grandmother all appeared, one after another, lining up right beside him. They got the feeling there was some invisible drill instructor right by them. The grocer and his family quickly set out on foot toward the bay. Following them with her eyes, Meg was rooted in place. Something black took hazy shape in the depths of the fog. And by the time she realized it was made up of people, they'd closed to within a few yards. Meg was so scared, she was ready to shut her eyes. But they passed right in front of her as they walked toward the bay, just as Gaz and his family had done. "Auntie Mabel," the girl murmured. Passing by was an old woman who lived alone now that all her kin were dead, and the community looked after her. The Capsh family. The father, Nod, was at the fore, leading a quintet of the village's most accomplished fishermen. Mr. Ulmer? He was the most important in the village. He was the most important person in the village, their shipwright, who would be 90 this year. Miriam Hardy. A month ago, the young blonde had been widowed when she lost her husband in a storm, but they said she'd be married again inside of a month. Every bachelor in town had his sights set on her. All of them were walking toward the bay. Meg stood stock still, unable to do anything, but not one of them turned so much as a vacant eye in her direction. What's going on? Is something waiting for them there? Is this what happened to the people long ago? Meg took a deep breath. She'd finally remembered her family. Dad? Mom? Ida? She ran like a woman possessed. It was a minor miracle that she didn't get lost or trip even once. And there was no saying how many people she passed. The only thing that was clear was that everyone in the village was headed in the same direction. The village was built on stony terraces like the rice fields of mountainous Asia, with the bottommost tier reaching down to the beach. The houses were connected to one another by stone steps. Meg's house was on the third tier. She crept into the place, but quickly realized nobody was there. Still, she couldn't help running through each and every room. When Meg left the house, she was crying in spite of herself. All she had to rely on was the spear gun she carried, and one belonging to her father. That was the spring-powered type, and it was quite powerful, with just as much force as the gas-propelled ones rich people used. Come what may, the girl was going to bring her family back. That determination burned like a fire in her, though she felt like someone was whispering to her that it was no use. 3 minutes of running down cobblestone streets brought the girl to the bay. She pushed her way through the fog, which was still clinging to her when she arrived, at which point she murmured, "I'm too late." There was no sign of anyone. Meg climbed up on the breakwater and ran. Going all the way down to the end, she peered out to sea. Shadowy figures melted into view. Beyond the bay was no shallow shoal. It was more than 30 feet deep out there. Yet the figures were walking across the surface. Meg could only watch in astonishment as they went, and in less than 2 seconds' time they'd vanished. And then, with a feeling like the fog surrounding her suddenly carried a chill that reached down to the marrow of her bones, Meg forgot herself, dashing down the road that led from the village to the highway. And then, with a feeling like the fog surrounding her suddenly carried a chill that reached down to the marrow of her bones, Meg forgot herself, dashing down the road that led from the village to the highway. On receiving notification, the sheriff immediately had 2 of his 3 deputies speed to the village, and as the messenger pigeon they dispatched reported that the place remained shrouded in fog, they were ordered not to enter the village. The lawman had then fallen into serious meditation, for he was not without considerable knowledge about the fog that struck from the sea. Though he possessed the skepticism that came with his line of work, the sheriff believed everything Meg had told him. He was certain the villagers had walked off across the sea, and he was equally certain of their destination. Based on that conviction, it only took him less than a minute to decide his next course of action. Because he'd known that someday this would come to pass, and had given the response to the situation consideration on more than one occasion. They were thoughts that had soon faded from his mind, but now that speculation had become reality, the sheriff was quite proud of himself in not being taken by surprise. To do that, they'd need a good number of people, and since something weird was going on with the island, amateurs like the townsfolk and fishermen were excluded from the fight, because the nobility were undoubtedly involved. The sheriff ordered his remaining deputy to go around town and talk to all the roughest customers. He had signs put up guaranteeing a flat wage of $10,000, and he ran the emergency siren before sending out messenger pigeons with the same information to be disseminated to every town and village within a day's ride. That night, nearly 100 confident souls had called on his office, but on hearing the details, they turned right around, one after another, until only 4 remained the following morning. Now they stood shoulder to shoulder with the sheriff on the breakwater. As far as the sheriff was concerned, the one saving grace was that the former mayor of Meg's village had left there, and for the past year he'd been living with a daughter who'd married into a family in Pearson. At the sheriff's request, the old man had straightened up his troubled back and clambered onto a sidewalk horse. Well, this is a fine hole in our plans. We got nobody to take the helm. Garagon's complaint was greeted by silence. So long as the former mayor objected, these warriors couldn't cross over to the field of battle. It was the youngest of the bounty hunters who shattered the oppressive air, saying, "Leave it to me. I was born in a fishing town. My rowing ain't half bad." "How old are you?" asked the former mayor. "Huh? How old do I look? And how old were you when you left your hometown?" "Let's see. 7. You been across the brine since?" The young man shrugged his shoulders. "I can't give the helm to a 7-year-old. Just accept it." "So what the hell are we supposed to do then?" The sound of waves was the only answer to the agitated boy's query. The solution came from a most unexpected source. "I'll do it," said the girl. Page break indicated by a small cross. Second part, end.